Okay, we're going to get things started. We actually have a lot of material to cover in a fairly short period of time. Thank you very much for coming out for my session today. We're going to be talking about the new visualization types within Excel. And I'm fully aware that I'm the only thing standing between you and the awesome boxed lunches that are preparing for us downstairs, so I'll make sure this is a good use of your time and we can get on to that. I've also brought some swag here, so if afterwards you have questions, feel free to stop by, grab some swag, and I'll stick around and answer whatever questions you may have. All right, so this presentation is broken out into 4 primary chunks. I'm first going to briefly touch upon the positioning of our current BI and visual analytics tools. Then I'll give you a quick recap of the investments that we've made in the visualization space over the last decade. The majority of this presentation will be focused on a demo that I'll give you of the new visualization types, and I'll be focusing on the big announcement we made on Monday, which is the native integration of maps within Excel. So I'll give you the full tour of that. And then I'll wrap it up with giving you a feel for our roadmap in terms of the future of visualizations within Excel and the Office portfolio. Okay. So I'm sure a lot of you are aware that we have 2 primary assets within our BI portfolio, that being Excel and Power BI. Excel is a wonderful application for doing ad hoc analysis of both structured and unstructured data. And Power BI is a great tool for doing interactive visual analytics for creation of dashboards and reports and things of that nature. Both of these applications have their strengths. And what we're trying to do is build tighter integration between these environments so that you could actually start in one and migrate to the other depending upon what your needs warrant. That integration isn't complete yet, but that is a process that we're going through right now, and over time it'll just get better and better as we work on that integration. All right, so we've spent a lot of time talking to our customers to better understand the user journey that they go through in discovering of insights and sharing them with the broader organization. Typically, it starts out with them getting data, and a lot of times it's in a very messy form. So they need to clean it up, spend some energy, making sure it's put into a digestible form, after which they can more effectively analyze it, starting to tease out those key insights and nuggets of wisdom. A lot of times they bring in visualization tools to help with that process to identify patterns, trends, and outliers in the data. Then once that's digested and they've actually found some interesting things, a lot of times it's published to a much broader audience, at which time a wider audience consumes it in some form or another. Now, I've drawn this in a very linear, clean process, but we know life is never that simple. A lot of times it's a matter of jumping back and forth between these pillars of activity. And what we're trying to do is build tool sets that allow you that flexibility and fluidity of going through this process, but also moving around and adjusting to the needs that may warrant the situation. So let me give you a quick recap of some of the investments that we've made over the last decade in the spirit of helping users through this journey of finding the insights and communicating them to the broader organization. We'll start off with Office 2007, but I just want to get a show of hands. How many of you are on Office 2016 right now? Oh, wonderful. So it looks like the majority of you. How about 2013? All right, not a bad. 2010? All right. How about 2007? There's a few of you out there. If you come up afterwards, I'll give you a free T-shirt to get you upgraded, okay? If that'll get you over the hump, that's worth it. I'll give you 2 T-shirts. How does that sound? All right. So Office 2007. This was actually a pretty groundbreaking release for us. This was the first time we introduced the ribbon. There was quite a change in the user experience around that. We also unified the charting engine across Office. The same engine that powered the Excel charts was now used in Word and PowerPoint. So you had the same look and feel, the same functionality, and more seamless experience across those different applications. We tied in document themes, so along with styles and layouts, so that you could easily create your assets very quickly and have them look professionally. So your charts looked very consistent with your tables and your shapes and your smart art. It's all kind of blended together. And with that, we introduced Office Art Effects, giving you kind of the fancier look of things like drop shadows and glows. And also, we allowed you to publish your charts to Excel Online. So it was a pretty groundbreaking release, lots of new things happening with that. Then we move over to Office 2010, and we doubled down on performance and stability. We really wanted to make that a great experience for everybody. We did introduce a few new features, that being spark lines and icon sets. And we move on to 2013. This is another major release for us. The theme of this release was largely around making productivity gains, making it easier for you to create and consume charts within Office. So we introduced this notion of chart recommendations. You select your data, we apply a series of heuristics to that data set, and we picked a set of charts, like 5 or 6, that were most appropriate for that data. So you didn't have to dig through all the different lists and things of that nature to find the particular chart of interest. We also made it much easier for you to create combo charts, like column and line. We gave you the option to use live preview. So as you hovered over a chart within a gallery, we showed you what that chart would look like before you had to commit that action. So it kind of allowed quicker iteration on things before having to really dive into it. We gave you the ability to add various chart elements and styles using Proximal UI. Those are those tiny little buttons on the right-hand side of the chart. So the travel distance is very short, so you can quickly access the most commonly used things to modify the chart for your particular needs. We also integrated task panes. These are the pieces of UI that are on the right-hand side that give you access to all of the more fine-grained properties of the chart. And we have the ability for, these are basically modeless task panes, so that whenever you apply a property, you can see the immediate effect on the chart with that operation. You don't have to dismiss a modal dialog and then see what the effect was. The last thing was we introduced a new capability around richer data labels. So you can richly annotate your charts, bind it to different sets. And if you've seen my tips and tricks presentation earlier in the day, I showed you some examples of that. If you didn't get to see it, that session was recorded, so please look it up. There's a lot of really interesting things that you can do now with labeling on your charts. So now we fast forward to Office 2016. We introduced a slew of new chart types. It's been a while since we've introduced any new chart types, so we had a whole bunch coming in this round, and I'll give you some demos of those in my demo portion of this presentation. And one of the big highlights of this conference was the public release of, or public announcement that is, of maps, native integration of maps into Excel. These are currently in beta. They're not going to be publicly available until end of year, so they're coming very soon. If you're an insider, you'll get them sooner, but pretty much they're in the pipeline, and they're almost done. So with that, let me shift over to the demo portion of my presentation. So periodically on the product team, we like to work with real customers because they keep us grounded in real scenarios and real problems that you're trying to solve. Not too long ago, we worked with the Seattle Art Museum and tried to use them as a case study for some of the features that we're developing for 3D maps. I'll show you an example of that here a little bit later on. So we worked with them through various business scenarios, making sure we understand the real problems they're trying to solve, and we use real data sets to keep us grounded in solving those problems. So this demo will be using a data set that the Seattle Art Museum was kind enough to share with us. It's based on ticket sales data for the Picasso exhibit that took place at the Seattle Art Museum several years ago. But it actually illustrates some really interesting things, and I'll show you those as I highlight some of the new chart types. So if you're ever in the Seattle area, please check out the Seattle Art Museum. It's a wonderful visual arts institution. It's one of the premier ones in the Pacific Northwest. All right, so with any organization, it's typically important to show the financial health of that organization, both the internal stakeholders as well as external stakeholders. A very common way of doing that is through the illustration in a waterfall chart, which is what I'm showing you here. This is one of the new chart types that was released in Excel 2016. To create one of these chart types, simply select your data, go up to Insert, and move over to the waterfall icon here, and then drop it on your page. Nothing to it. That's a pretty straightforward process, and we automatically lay it out for you. You can now interact with this chart like you would any other chart. If you want to modify any of the individual data points, you simply select one of these. For example, if I wanted to designate this as a subtotal, I'd right-click on it and set as subtotal. And now I got an illustration of the revenue for the Seattle Art Museum. This is based on their 2014 financial statement. Now this is, as I was saying earlier, a natively integrated chart type, and it behaves like all the other chart types. I can now copy-paste this into other presentations. For example, if I copy this into PowerPoint, this is my original slide deck, and it will pick up the theme and formatting of this slide deck. So you can see the colors changed on me because they're snapping to the theme of that presentation. Now that it's in PowerPoint, I can still interact with it just like I would any other chart. I've got access to my styles and my layouts and the other editing capabilities as you would expect with any normally integrated chart type. So that's a waterfall chart. Pretty straightforward. A lot of times it's used for financial statements, but it doesn't necessarily have to be restricted to just finance. You can pretty much use it for any type of situation where you want to illustrate the rise and fall of values in a certain process. Now, with the Seattle Art Museum, they have an interesting business model. It's not all that different than a lot of other organizations. There's a slight twist to it, however. First, they have non-members. Those are people who buy tickets to their exhibits and then come to the exhibit. But what they like to do is move those non-members to members, essentially subscription-based service. Okay? A lot of people like subscriptions because it's a very predictable form of income. So that's one of their key goals, is to move non-members to members. But being a nonprofit, they can actually do one better, and that is to get donors. Those are people who have some spare change in their pocket. They want to, out of the graciousness of their heart, give them a donation, and that really helps the bottom line. So ultimately, what they want to do is move non-members to members and then move members to donors, because that's really where their financial health will have the greatest impact. So if you look at the waterfall chart, you look at, this is the membership. This is basically people paying an annual fee. Let me stretch this out a little bit here. You can see that it accounts for a pretty significant part of their overall financial health. But then you look at grants and gifts, and it's even more so. So it's really critical for them to focus on getting those members to become donors. Okay, so that's a key part of the data set, and as I was going through the analysis and trying to tease out the different things that they could do to optimize their limited marketing dollars to promote that. All right, so as I was saying, this demo is going to focus on the Picasso ticket sales, which took place several years ago at the Seattle Art Museum. It was a pretty large event. It attracted over 400,000 visitors to the center. 20,000 of those were students. It was one of the biggest events in the arts community in the Pacific Northwest. So this is the data set that I'll be using, and I'll break it down for you. First up, we're going to illustrate the basic data set. Now, the data is not super crazy. It's pretty straightforward stuff. So we have a sales type, which is an online ticket sale or on-site being at the facility of the Seattle Art Museum. Then we have a membership. They're either a member or non-member. We have a ticket type, and you can think of this as like their customer segmentation. They've got things like SAM member, child 12 and under, senior citizen, so on and so forth. And then we have the actual price of the ticket. Now, bear in mind, members are not paying anything for their tickets, so you see for a member, there is zero, essentially, for that ticket, which is actually a good thing. They want to increase the number of members in their organization. So in the process of analyzing their data, the types of questions they were trying to answer are really not that different than most other businesses. They want to understand who their customers are, where they're coming from, what motivates them to buy a ticket, what motivates them to come to an exhibit. How do you optimize the limited marketing dollars to target the right segment of people to increase ticket sales, membership, and ultimately folks who want to give donations to that organization? So one of the first things I did was I threw this data into a tree map, which is a great way to visualize the hierarchical nature of the data. So you can see here we have the ticket sales, and you can see right off the bat, we've got a little bit more of an online sales than on-site. That's not too surprising, but there isn't as big of a difference as what I would have expected. In fact, you might want to try to promote more of online sales because it's less cost-intensive typically than having to have physical people manning booths and stuff like that. You can see some other differences here. It looks like the segmentation here is a little bit small, but one of the big differences that jumps out is you've got a lot of different customer segments buying tickets on site than you do online. So a lot of times when you do these types of analysis, it's a bit of peeling the onion. You answer one question, but it leads to several others. And that's just the nature of doing various explorations. What I like about the visualizations, though, is they're kind of like lenses on the problem. You switch out one visualization for another, and they tend to highlight different aspects of the data. And that's essentially what I'm going to walk you through with this demonstration. Now, with our histogram implementation, currently we only show the parent and the child of those values. And the value, this column here, is reflected by the area of the square. If you want to show the full hierarchy, then you can use the sunburst chart, which is shown right here. So as you can see, we have online. If I click on that, we then have member and then adult. And we've also introduced some other interactivity. So we call this series highlighting, series dimming. So when I select an individual data point, it highlights that particular data point to draw your attention to it. So this is one of the new things that we're introducing with some of these new chart types. All right, next up I want to take a look at the distribution of ticket prices. Whenever you get into these analyses, you start forming different questions, and you want to take a look at different aspects of the data. So here I have the actual price, and you can't see the full list, but it's 65,000 records of data that's in this list. And so I did a quick average. It came up to $9.72, which isn't terribly insightful. One of the problems with averages is they can be influenced up or down depending upon outliers, as an example. So it's not necessarily the best statistical measure of your data. A lot better way of looking at it is more of a distribution of the data. So I'm going to use a histogram for that purpose. So I've got one of my cells selected. I'm going to go to the Insert tab, over to Histogram. And so we just ripped through 65,000 records in the blink of an eye and generated a histogram. Now, this is real data, and real data tends to be messy sometimes. And it's kind of strange looking. It's like, all these values to the right, this long tail of things. Doesn't look like there's anything there. There actually are values there. There's like 1 or 2 ticket sales. But they're getting dwarfed by this big column right at the left-hand side here, which represents the members. Those are the people not paying for a ticket. So they actually recorded that. You can see that there's quite a few of them, which actually is a good thing. But then we've got all these other ticket prices out here. And if you think of a ticket as a SKU in your product line, that's a lot of SKUs that you're managing. So there might be some opportunities here to simplify this so that it's a little bit easier in terms of the accounting, the understandability of your business. It's just one possible opportunity that they could pursue in terms of optimizing their operations. Now, with a histogram, we can quickly clean this up without too much trouble. I'm going to double-click on the value axis here, which brings up my histogram options. The first thing I want to do is change the overflow bin. I really don't care about all these kind of this long tail of 1s and 2s ticket sales. I'm just going to collapse them down into a single bin, and I've already looked at the data enough that I know that that bin, really the threshold starts at about 23. So you can see that right away, I've cleaned up the data pretty quickly, and it starts to become, patterns start to emerge with cleaning that up. Another thing you look at is these bin sizes. We automatically bin the values when you generate the histogram. We use an industry standard called Scott's Normal Reference Rule, and there are several different types of binning algorithms out in the industry. We just chose that particular one because it was fairly common. That's not to say it's going to give you good results right off the bat every single time. You can go in and control the bin sizes simply by clicking on bin width here. Let's change it to 2. So it's a grouping of 2 values in my histogram. So now I can see the distribution in a little bit clearer way. Show some of the patterns start to pop a little bit better than they did before. So as an example, I can look at this 22 and I say, wow, there's 15,000 tickets that were sold essentially in this particular bucket. And so this is more representative of average types of tickets that we're selling than the average of $9.72. So histograms are a wonderful tool for kind of doing that diagnostic first look at your data set. Another very useful tool is that of the Pareto chart. Now, this chart's a little bit busy, but again, it's real data. And that's kind of the nature of real data. The Pareto chart gets its name from the Pareto principle, which effectively says 80% of the effects are due to 20% of the causes. Stated more simply, you want to focus your energy on the greatest bang for the buck. So if you've got 20% of your customers, as an example, that are responsible for the majority of your profits, that's where you want to focus your energy, especially if you have limited marketing dollars or sales dollars or whatever the case may be. So the Pareto principle is a wonderful tool for digging into those details. So the way to read this is, the Pareto principle is essentially like a sorted histogram, where for a particular category, like adult, it shows you the value that is contributed by the adults. And then this line here is called the Pareto line. This is a percent accumulation. So as I add up the adult and then the senior 62 and over, that adds up to form this line. So you can see with the adult, that is contributing roughly a little bit over, or pretty close to 70% of the overall financial impact for the organization. If I then add in seniors 62 and over, then I'm over 80% of impact. And applying the Pareto principle, essentially what you need to do is you need to start at the 80% line and then scan across. So it's this line here. So it intersects the Pareto line. Then you can drop down to see where you need to draw that particular line. So if you zoom in on that, and I'll drop down. And effectively what it's saying is these two audience groups represent greater than 80% of the financial impact for the ticket sales. So from a standpoint of prioritization, these are the guys that I really want to focus my energy on versus this long tail of other folks that aren't as significant in that regard. You may have other strategies for addressing them that maybe don't require as much time and energy. Okay. Now, money isn't about, this isn't always about money. Sometimes you need to focus on other aspects of your business, such as attendance, because sometimes the folks who are attending this, who are a lot of times non-members, will become members at some point down the road. So these are like your future customers. So I did another look at the data set from the lens of attendance. And as you can see, this, the category axis shows a similar combination of things, but they moved around a little bit. So applying the Pareto principle once again, if I hit that 80% line, it's right around this area. So if I want to optimize the attendance, this is the group of people that I really want to focus my energies on to increase the overall attendance within my organization. So Pareto principle, Pareto chart are wonderful tools for doing this type of diagnostic. Next up is box and whisker. Box and whisker is one of the more statistically heavy visualization types in our portfolio. What it's great for is showing you the distribution of data across multiple groups. So what I've done here is I've looked at the online sales versus on-site sales, and you can see these are the number of tickets that were sold for this particular group, and you can see a pretty tight grouping for online, but a much broader distribution for on-site. These are the ticket prices again. But let me back up and actually explain what you're looking at. So with a box and whisker chart, it's showing a number of statistical measures. The first one of which is this little X right in the center here. Most people can relate to this one. It's the mean. It's the average value of all of the ticket prices, which, as I was saying earlier, can be sometimes misleading because of outliers. It draws in certain directions. So it's good to look at other types of metrics to kind of balance your view of what the data is telling you. And that's essentially what the box and whisker chart allows you to do. So the next one here is this line, this line that cuts across here. That is the median, or 50th percentile. Effectively what that means is 50% of the values are below this line and 50% of the values are above this line. Then we have the formation of the box itself. The bottom part of the box is the first quartile, or 25th percentile, which again means 25% of the values are below and the rest are above. And then the top part of the box is the 75th percentile, or third quartile. Again, 75% of the values are below, the rest are above. The rest of this is just the formation of the whiskers, which you can see the definition here. IQR represents the interquartile range, which is the difference between this top edge and the bottom edge for the first and third quartiles. And then we have the outliers. So it gives you a good sense as to some of the core metrics or statistics, as well as this notion of outliers. So what I did was I wanted to take a look at the ticket sales across all of their customer segments. So let's go ahead and select those in our table here. And again, this is going across 65,000 records. We'll go to box and whisker. And it generates a chart pretty quickly with that. And they've got quite a few different customer segments. The nice thing with that, though, is you can see that the ticket prices within a customer segment are pretty consistent. You can see there's a very tight box in that regard. And the average and the median are pretty close to one another as well, with the exception of one group, which is this K through 12 school class fee. There's quite a wide variance in ticket prices for this audience here. And this is maybe another opportunity to tighten that up a bit, maybe have more standardized pricing, maybe even collapsing some of these audience groups into more uniform price ranges. So yet another opportunity to check into. Forecasting. This is another feature we introduced in Excel 2016. The exhibit went live on October 10th. And as you can see, based on this data of ticket sales, everybody waited to the last minute and then started buying tickets, which is typical human behavior. You know, we've all seen that happen. And then it just kind of went crazy from there. This is oscillations. The challenge for a business like the Seattle Art Museum is they've got to staff people at the kiosks for selling tickets. They also have to make sure their servers don't crash because of the influx of volume. So wouldn't it be cool if you could actually predict what the actual sales volume would be over time beyond your immediate period that you're looking at? So to do that, you simply select a value here, go to your Data tab, go to the Forecast button, and we automatically generate a forecast based on historical data. And then from here, you can change various parameters like your confidence interval and timeline and stuff like that. Now, in looking at this chart, essentially the center line here represents the main forecast, and the upper and lower lines, which are thinner, represent the upper and lower confidence intervals in that. And so with this information, you can more effectively manage your operations. If you're wondering, why are there these dips and spikes in the data, these dips represent Mondays of the week, and the spikes represent Fridays. So for whatever reason, this is just the dynamics that played out, they would want more people available and more server capacity on Fridays, for example, than they would on Mondays. Okay? All right. Moving on to funnel. A funnel chart is one of the newer chart types in our portfolio. We released this about 2 to 3 months ago. It is not as sophisticated as a number of the others, like the histogram or box and whisker. It's a pretty straightforward chart type. It largely represents the transition. It's a lot of times used for like a sales funnel, so the initial contact of customers, which customers are actually buying from you, which ones have repeat purchases. In this particular case, I used it to represent the audience of the Seattle Art Museum. So as you can see here, there are roughly 22,000 members or people, membership of the Seattle Art Museum in the Seattle metropolitan area. That drops off to 12,000 when you go outside the city in the state of Washington, and then outside of Washington, it drops to 700. So you can see the transition like this. This chart type is not going to give you any huge insights in the data. A lot of times you'll use the other chart types, but it's actually a pretty effective tool for storytelling, to tell the message behind the data. And a lot of times people aren't going to remember the exact figure like 22,000, but they'll remember the general message and the general shape of the visualization. So for example, if this wasn't 12,000, let's say it was 800 instead, this particular shape would be more memorable than necessarily a number that you would try to communicate to a broader audience. This is a T shape, effectively. So that's one of the main uses for funnel chart. What I want to do now is shift over to maps. As I said earlier, this is a big announcement on Monday. We now have native integration of maps into Excel. And let me show you what some of the data looks like for the Seattle Art Museum. Here I am looking at ticket sales across the state of Washington. And I'll show you some examples of how we go about creating these maps here in a moment. But let me just talk to the specifics of the scenario for right now. So this ticket sales, what we're looking at is a map that was generated for us. And simply selecting the data, clicking Insert Map, creates this. And what we're looking at here is basically a designer quality map. These are maps that you would typically find in the New York Times or the Washington Post. They're very, very tightly modified to make sure that everything looks very precise. And we're only showing you the geography that is relevant for the data that you're trying to plot. So in this particular case, I'm showing you the sales data. The higher sales is marked in red, so not a big surprise. A lot of sales in the Seattle area, okay? But some other interesting things about this is if you move outside of the Seattle area, there are pockets of higher ticket sales. So you can see in this zip code right here, 98926, there's a fair amount of ticket sales going on there. And these folks have about an hour-and-a-half drive to Seattle. And they're going across a mountain range, the Snoqualmie Pass. So there's a bit of effort required there. It just so happens that there's an art enthusiast community within this area. It's Ellensburg. So this is something that's kind of insightful that jumps out at you when you start to look at maps. It's not just about the data. It's about where people actually live. And so you can bring more context to that information. It's a real powerful tool with these types of visualizations. But let's take another slice of that data and look at the population densities within the state of Washington. So if you look at this, again, most of the ticket sales are in the Seattle area, not as surprising. There's a lot of people who live in Seattle. But there's also other pockets that there's fairly high concentrations of folks. So for example, down in this area right here, this is Walla Walla, Washington. Okay, there's quite a few people in that particular area. They could target with getting memberships or selling tickets and things like that. Over here, this is the Spokane area. So just another way of taking a look at the data to gain other insights that may not have been immediately obvious just by looking at zip codes or street addresses and things like that. All right, if I scroll across here, I've got another map which shows you membership versus non-membership. And what I did was I calculated if there was a higher percentage of members versus non-members, and if there were a higher percentage of members, I colored it green. If not, I colored it yellow. What I'm illustrating here is the fact that we not only support numerical data, continuous series, but also categorical data. So in the previous maps, I was showing you population densities and ticket sales. This one, I'm showing you categorical information. They're either member or non-member, as you can see by the legend at the top here. Now, what's interesting about this data set is that, yeah, we have a fair number of members in the Seattle area, but there's still a lot of yellow in that area. So there's some opportunity there to get out and get those people, because it's just basically a walk to the Seattle Art Museum from where some of these people are living. But what's also interesting is there are pockets of members in the greater Washington area where you can actually use them as ambassadors to help convince their friends and family to buy memberships and sell more tickets and things like that. So that was kind of interesting when I looked at this data, was to see these little pockets of diehard fans of the Seattle Art Museum. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is set the Picasso ticket sales data aside, and we're going to dive into maps more specifically. I have a data set that better illustrates all of the wonderful capabilities that we have with maps. So I've got a whole collection of different data sets here, and the intent here is to show the breadth of features with our mapping tools. So this is state of California, and these are average listing prices. So I'm going to go ahead and create a map out of this. And as I was saying earlier, this is natively integrated, so if I simply click on recommended charts, that will bring up recommended charts, first one in the list, along with several others that may be relevant for your needs. But I'll go ahead and click on California here and insert that into the page. Notice the performance was pretty good. Essentially what we're doing is we have a local classifier that is identifying the columns in your data set that are geospatial in nature. And we're only taking those columns and passing them off to Bing to do the lat-long coordinate definition of the geographies. So we are using a service on the back end. Essentially what that means is the first time you create a map, you do need to be online. After you've created the map, it is locally saved into the file, so you don't have to be online after that. It's cached with the file. But this is a normal map. I can start to interact with it like I would normally any other map. And as I was saying earlier, these are designer quality maps. We're only showing the geography that is necessary to show the data set that I had, not showing you all of North America. And like a lot of other products that kind of use these tiles and stitch them together, I'm not showing you a whole bunch of extraneous information like roads and rivers and lakes and stuff like that. It's just really about the geography itself. What's really cool about this is it's all vector-based graphics. So I can go ahead and select a particular region right here. Let's say I want to emphasize this particular region of California. I can go up to my Format tab and apply any of the formatting that's normally available to me, like with any other chart. So for example, I could pop it out with a little bit of drop shadow here. So it kind of gives it a little bit more accentuation. And then you could add annotations to that and so on and so forth. Okay? So that's state of California. Let me delete this real quick. As I was saying earlier, this is showing just the data set that is relevant, the geography that is relevant for my map. So let's go ahead and insert another map. This is just showing California. If I were to add additional data right here, so let's go with Washington and put in a value of 5. It's a little bit cheaper to live in Washington than California. We automatically expand the geometry to encompass this new portion of the data. You can do this dynamically. If you were to move that, it would collapse down to California once again. So we're trying to really isolate the geometry in that way. Now, notice that we also pulled out other pieces like Alaska and Hawaii. We didn't show you all of the North American continent just to show you Alaska. It's just kind of tightly grouped in there with it. If there were data values, it would show those on the map as well. Okay. Let's take another look at this guy here. Create another map. This is showing you all of North America. Here, in this case, we do have Hawaii represented. It's relatively expensive to live in Hawaii, along with California. So I want to bear that in mind. Okay, let's move on to election data. Rumor has it we're going to have an election here pretty soon. And you guys see the debates on Monday night, the sparks flying. It's kind of exciting stuff. Get you kind of worked up. So let's go ahead and create a map of the political leanings. So these are projections, and I'm not trying to advocate for one group or the other. Depending upon which service you go to, there's going to be a variety of different opinions on this topic. But let's go ahead and create a map of these political leanings. So there you have it, map of Democrat versus Republican. Now, this does not look like a traditional red and blue map. That's because we don't know the context of your data, but you can easily change that. So if I were to select one of these legend items, like the Republicans, for example, go to the Home tab, I can change this to red states. And if I want Democrats, I'll change that to blue states. So there you have it, a nice red and blue representation of the Democratic affiliations, or leanings at least, for the current political groups. So far I've been talking a lot about North America-based data sets, but we do span the globe. We're using Bing as the backing service, and they have pretty good curation of geographies across the world. In North America alone, as an example, they manage over 40,000 zip codes, and those zip codes are changing on a regular basis. Regions are getting annexed into cities, and zip codes are changing, so it's a very fluid thing that they need to keep tabs on. So that's largely the main service that they're providing. Doesn't cost you anything extra. You get the benefits of that as just being on the latest version of Excel and Office as part of subscription. Okay, so as I was saying, we do support a wide variety of different territories. This is Poland. We can go ahead and create a chart on Poland, which I've shown on the right-hand side. Let's go ahead and create it for ourselves. Oops, I had selected just one individual data point. But you can see that we break out the territories in that. If we want to actually turn on labels for this, we can easily do that. I'll double-click on my chart and show region names. So if you're not terribly familiar with Poland, you can turn on the labels and have a better sense as to what you're looking at. Same is true for other parts of the world. Here's an example of China. Now, my Mandarin is a little weak, but we do support localization in this as well. So if I were to create a chart of these values, go ahead and create this. There's our chart right there. And if I go and turn on labels, we actually show you the localized or the actual English versions of those labels. So you can, again, get a better sense as to what you're looking at. Same is true with Japan. So Japan, we'll go ahead and insert that guy. And there we have it. So as you can see, we do have pretty good support for geographies outside of North America, Europe, Asia Pacific, so on and so forth. All right. So let me show you a few other quick examples. Here we have some examples of the fall of oil prices across the globe. Again, this is a representation of categorical data. So what we've done is create an actual formula in Excel to do these calculations and just bend the values into these various buckets so then we could represent them with colors across the various parts of the globe. Here's an example of uninsured population in North America. So this is just an example of the richness that we can achieve with this new charting engine. You can see these are zip codes throughout North America. Again, something you typically see in the New York Times. You can create it with a simple click of the button now. All right. Here's another representation of some categorical data in Africa. Again, an illustration of the support across various things. Here we have spread of the Zika virus. So one other thing I wanted to illustrate with this particular map is different projections. Whenever you try to take the globe, which is a three-dimensional sphere, and flatten that on a two-dimensional surface, there's going to be some form of distortion. To get around that, there are various projections you can use. And we support the most common ones here, like Mercator, Miller, Robinson. Each of them have their pros and cons, but we leave it up to you to choose which one is more preferable for you. Some of these projections emphasize certain parts of the world differently. So, for example, if I select Robinson, you can see the chart will change. Now, let's go with Miller. There we go. So you can see that it's a slightly different representation of the flattened globe. But again, it's your choice. We'll persist that with the file after you've picked it. We do pick one automatically as a default. And then the last one, of course, everyone's favorite is alcohol consumption or beer consumption in Europe. Just again, showing you the numerical scales and the global nature of the data that we can support. All right, so that's kind of a whirlwind tour of our new mapping capabilities. I'm going to just wrap up this presentation with showing you some of the roadmap we have for the future. All right. So what I just showed you was some of the newer features, that is, were funnel charts and maps. Those were released. Funnel charts were released about 2 to 3 months ago. Maps will be coming out by end of year. Those will be released as part of our Office 365 subscription. So if you're on subscription, great. You'll be able to get these and start using them right away. We're going to continue to release features on a pretty regular cadence. You probably have heard that message before. What we're also trying to do is democratize the use of data visualizations. You no longer need some expert in geospatial analysis to do things like maps. It's very simple. It's just a few clicks of a button. So we're going to continue that trend. We're also going to be exploring various interaction modes, lighting those up in the experience, be it on touch devices or large screen displays like you see here on the stage. You've seen the HoloLens. We're exploring opportunities in that space as well. We're going to be supporting all the devices in our current portfolio as well as many more. We currently run on the web, Android, Windows Universal, Windows Desktop. The one exception to that is iOS and Mac Desktop. We are working on it. It is coming soon. I can't give you an exact date, but those endpoints will be showing up very shortly with all of these new visualizations. We're also going to be providing more and more services. The Maps is the beginning of that experience where we're using Bing as a service to provide you those geographies. Bing, because it's a service, will get better and better over time. So if, for example, if the zip codes aren't exactly right in a certain region, they will curate that information and fix it over time, so you can rely on that service just getting better. Another area is analysis and exploration. I showed you a number of the chart types like box and whisker and histogram, which are really well suited for that. We're going to continue that trend of adding more visualizations as well as richer capabilities to allow you to do rich analysis and exploration. And then the flip side of that, there's the notion of storytelling. So once you've found those insights, you want to convey them to a larger audience. We're going to start introducing features that allow you to do that more effectively and really use the interactive and engagement of the storytelling mechanics to convey the story that you want. Big data is another area that we know is just getting bigger. The examples I showed here were, there were pretty reasonable sized data sets, 65,000 records with pretty good performance times. We know those data sizes will continue to grow. We've optimized our engine to be able to account for that and grow as the industry trends grow as well. The last time here is around machine learning. We're going to be exploring opportunities to be more intelligent with what we do with visualizations. The beginnings of that was with chart recommendations in the 2013 release, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. We can go so much further as we start to introduce this notion of machine learning where things just get smarter over time. All right. So I'm just going to wrap things up here. We've just recently announced this Excel community where we're allowing people to come and contribute, ask questions, share ideas. So it's a wonderful place to go and get help and talk about various things that are of interest to you. We also have a number of free resources for doing training as well as getting feedback on things. We have the hands-on labs. We've got some wonderful training courses out there, so I encourage you to check them out. And I'll take questions at the end, but also I just want to encourage you to, if you have other comments or things like that, please give us feedback. I'd love to get your thoughts on how you felt the session went, and if you have other ideas for topics that you're interested in, I want to hear that feedback as well. So with that, I have 2 minutes for questions on the stage, but I'm happy to step aside and take additional questions, and I also have swag up here for anybody who wants to grab a t-shirt. So, questions?
Sure. Is this on?
Yes.
How does the mapping software deal with exceptions or with, when you typed in Washington and you actually wanted that to go to Washington, D.C., how would you?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because we're using Bing as the backing service, they have a great dictionary of typical misspellings of words. So if you misspelled Washington or something like that, they will find a nearest match to that and most likely get it right in their geolocation of that geography. They are also, if in the event that we cannot determine what the geography is, we will give you an error message saying, hey, we only were able to identify 80% of the locations that you gave us. So you'll have feedback on how successful that geolocating was. Sure.
With the maps, how many locations can you grab at one time? Is there restrictions on how many?
There's no restriction right now on the number of location entries, number of records. However, if you throw 1,000 at it, it's going to take a little bit of time for it to grind through and do the geolocation of those, because it's basically talking to Bing at that time. So you have to use kind of some judgment in that regard. But we haven't put a cap on it per se. There is a limit to the number of records within Excel, so that's a natural limit as well. But I don't think you probably want to be sending 1 million records up to Bing. That would take quite a long time. Other questions?
Yeah, I had a question here.
Oh, sure, sorry.
I noticed you did not mention anything about PowerView. I don't know if that was on purpose because Microsoft is just moving that to the Power BI desktop.
Yeah, so PowerView has basically been taken out of the mainstream UI. You can still go into the add-ins manager and turn it on. PowerView has largely been replaced by Power BI, which is a whole separate application and actually has much richer capabilities than PowerView itself. So that is the forward direction that we're taking with that. We're not going to be investing in PowerView moving forward. However, you do raise another good comment regarding, I didn't really speak to the fact around 3D maps.
Right.
I mentioned that at the beginning when we talked about the Seattle Art Museum, but the notion of 3D maps, that was an add-in technology, which is still very good technology for doing geospatial 3D analysis and storytelling. It's still fully supported, still in the mainstream UI. What we're doing, though, is taking the core capabilities out of that add-in and incorporating them in its native capabilities. So 2D maps was the first generation that you're seeing as that migration. The problem with add-ins is they are very difficult to get running on different endpoints, like Android as an example, or the web. So by doing this, our maps now will run on all these different endpoints.
Is there going to be a certain bridge between Excel and Power BI desktop?
Say it one more time.
Is there going to be certain bridge connection or something where I can just connect directly from Excel and see the Power BI desktop?
Yeah, so there, as I mentioned at the very beginning of the presentation, we're working on tighter integration between Excel and Power BI. One of the early steps in that process is you can now publish an Excel workbook to Power BI, so that you can see these things online and you can pin various assets within your Excel workbook, like a pivot table or a chart, to be part of your Power BI dashboard. We're still working on the full scope of that integration, but it's part of the roadmap.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. Okay. Okay. Sure. Sure. Yeah, so I think your question is, do we provide an on-prem version of Office 2016 for purposes of piloting and stuff like that? Yeah, we do. I'm not sure exactly where you go. You should probably work through your TAM to determine, like, for your particular account, how to best get those bits. You can always go and get a 30-day trial of any of our products on the web, but that may not be the most appropriate route. There you go. Yeah. Great. Thank you. Yes. Sure. So your question is basically you're on a software assurance plan, not Office 365 subscription. Are these new features part of the assurance plan? Unfortunately, I'm not an expert on what's limited or available in the assurance plan, so I can't really answer your question, but afterwards I can put you in contact with someone who could. Okay? Other questions? Yeah.
So this is client side. You mentioned that it's embedded in Excel.
Yep.
What if you're on a secret network? Can you really take these bring it downside and get the map
Yes. Your question essentially is if you're on a lockdown environment that doesn't have access to external services, how do you get the maps facility? Right now, we do require you to have access to Bing. And as far as I know, I don't think you can have on-prem Bing running. It's a cloud-based service. So I think you're a bit out of luck in that regard. With our current version, there's no way that I'm aware of. If we want to talk afterwards, there might be some creative options that we could explore to help work around your particular situation. Oh, there. Great. Thank you for your time. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Yeah.